Mr. Clerk, we'll return to General File LB627. 627, excuse me.
Mr. President, 627 is a bill by Senator Pansy Brooks relating to discrimination. It amends numerous sections. It prohibits discrimination based upon sexual orientation and gender identity. It defines terms. The bill was introduced on January 23 of this year. At that time, referred to the Judiciary Committee. The bill is advanced to general file. At this time, I have no amendments pending the bill, Mr. President.
Senator Pansy Brooks, you're recognized to open on LB 627.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. LB 627 is a bill that is near and dear to my heart. It prohibits employment discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. First, I want to say to my friends, constituents, co-workers, and darling family, do not lose heart over the things that you may hear today. Many of us care about you and embrace you. The conservative members of the Omaha and Lincoln Chambers value and respect you and want you here to work. I apologize in advance for any hurtful or hateful things that you may hear today. The negative voices are holding on to a primitive fear that valuing and protecting you somehow delegitimizes them. Clearly, society is changing. Clearly, Nebraska will ultimately see the light. To my colleagues, if you feel compelled to stand up today and say, I like LGBTQ people, but please consider keeping your light off. Whatever follows is hurtful and founded upon a millennia of homophobic rhetoric. My mom used to say, if you don't have anything kind to say, then don't say anything. I would modify her advice and say, if you don't have anything kind to say about a vulnerable group of Nebraskans, please say nothing. Your vote will speak volumes. I am grateful to the many people who went to the hearing on LB 627 and made their voices heard. I too am one who wants my voice heard because this issue is deeply personal to me, just as it is to our brothers and sisters in Nebraska and across the nation. My son Taylor said a rainbow would appear over the Capitol on the day of the hearing for this bill, and my heart melted when someone actually sent me a picture of a rainbow over our Capitol on that day. Well, this morning when I arose, there was a rainbow painted on the wall in my bedroom. I have hope, and I am fortified by the divine love surrounding this issue. To be sure, there are many practical reasons to advance LB 627, but the extension of love and kindness to a community that has been marginalized is every bit as important. Under LB 627, it would be unlawful employment practice for an employer, an employment agency, or a labor organization to discriminate against an individual on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The Act applies to employers with 15 or more employees, employers with state contracts, the state of Nebraska, governmental agencies, and political subdivisions. Current law already prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, disability, marital status, or national origin. So this is totally consistent with existing non-discrimination statutes. The bill also maintains the current exemption for religious entities under Nebraska Statute 48-1103 and the protections under the ministerial exception pursuant to the recent Supreme Court case, Hosanna-Tabor. This case protects Nebraskans against being fired simply for who they are and whom they love. How twisted and cruel to think that we can judge another's love. Yet this is still happening in Nebraska today, even after we've made much progress on acceptance of the LGBTQ community. I will remind this body that this same bill has been advanced to the floor of the legislature before, twice during my tenure, thanks to Senator Morfeld. Most recently in 2017, when the Judiciary Committee moved it to general file on a 6-1 vote. This bill made it to the floor in the 2015-16 biennium and became my personal priority bill. While I am enormously disheartened that this bill did not pass, I rejoice with others regarding the strides that the LGBTQ community has made since 2015-16, most particularly on marriage equality. When I prioritized the bill in 2015, it was prior to the Obergefell Supreme Court decision that brought us marriage equality. At that time, Senator Morfeld and I talked to so many of you, and you said, just let the Supreme Court decide, and once they've decided, then we can move forward and protect the LGBTQ community as far as workplace, once they're able to get married. Well, we're here again, and I am asking you to move forward and pass these protections. Today, 67% of Americans, 2/3 of the country, support marriage equality. Times have changed, thank goodness, and it's making Nebraska's lack of movement on employment discrimination look absurd and archaic. 21 states in the District of Columbia already offer employment protections for their LGBTQ citizens, including our neighboring states of Colorado and Iowa. These protections provide competitive economic advantages to states that offer them because they increase the ability of employers to recruit and retain top talent across the country. In turn, it helps states and communities recruit employers to bring local jobs. The Human Rights Campaign provides a list of companies that have non-discrimination policies. Prominent Nebraska businesses include the Union Pacific, ConAgra, TD Ameritrade, and Blue Cross Blue Shield, Mutual of Omaha, Werner Enterprises, First Data, and many others offer this specific protection. Nebraska has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country at 2.8%. While we want low unemployment rates, it can be a double-edged sword. We also want the business community to have trained workers so we can grow our economy and, yes, pay property taxes. We simply need more people to expand our workforce. The state chamber and local chambers across the state continually say the #1 business issue is workforce development. We had representatives of both the Lincoln and Omaha chambers and young professionals in the hearing, and they explained why 627 is crucial for our ability to recruit and retain both employers and employees. It is clear that we are stifling our state's economy by not providing the basic civil rights protections for all Nebraska employees. When we are competing with our neighboring states for talent, including Iowa and Colorado, which do provide these protections, we can't afford to be a state that tells our young people that they aren't welcome here. Whether they are born here, go to school here, or are just looking to make a life for themselves in our great state, we must have an open for business sign on our door. Omaha, in its quest to compete with other cities, enacted a similar non-discrimination ordinance in 2012. The ordinance is working. 7 years have passed and the city is thriving economically. Churches are growing and life is good in Omaha. Sincerely held religious beliefs have remained strong and unaffected. The irony is that those religious beliefs are protected pursuant to the exact law we are seeking to amend here today to provide additional protections for other Nebraskans. It is dumbfounding to me that those who fought to be protected from discrimination for their sincerely held religious beliefs now see nothing inconsistent in their battle to be able to legally discriminate against others. I hope we can do the same thing as Omaha at the state level, and that we will become true to our state motto adopted in 1867, equality before the law. That motto could act as a beacon to welcome the young people we need in our state and the businesses we hope to recruit to our communities. To our
1 minute.
LGBTQ citizens and future citizens, let us proclaim, come, we want you here. Help us make Nebraska thrive. Colleagues, the time for adoption of this bill has arrived. I want to personally thank Senator Morfeld and Senator Chambers and many others for bringing these bills and waging these battles in years past. Finally, I would ask each of you to remember we are a gathering of souls here, each charged with loving our neighbors as ourselves, casting no stones, and fulfilling the law through loving others. We want all hands which can help us make Nebraska grow. We want all people able and willing to be part of our dwindling workforce. We want all hearts to make Nebraska strong, no matter the love for which those hearts beat. With that, I ask you to advance LB627 to select file. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator McCollister has some guests with us today. 44 students and 2 teachers from the 4th grade at Mount Clare Elementary in Millard. They are seated in the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator Morfeld, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I want to rise in support of LB627 and thank Senator Patty Pansing Brooks for introducing this legislation and carrying on the cause and fight that we've fought together for the last 4 years and carrying on a fight that Senator Chambers has fought for many years before we were here. Colleagues, I urge you to take a second look at this. I know you've probably heard a lot of differing opinions on this, some fears, and some concerns. That being said, I'll tell you right now that those fears and concerns are unfounded, that if you look just to Omaha, which that metro area, I suppose it's just the city of Omaha, but the metro area is about a third of the population of the state. And particularly the city, they've had this in place now for several years. And the economy has not collapsed there. There hasn't been frivolous lawsuits. Businesses have not gone out of business because they're firing gay folks and being held accountable for it. Things are going well in Omaha. And things are going well in general in Nebraska, but they could be going a lot better. They could be going a lot better because our number one problem in this state is keeping particularly a young and talented workforce, a workforce in general, but a young and talented workforce in the state. And I'll tell you right now that I can name 5 or 6 of the people that I went to law school with and undergrad with that are never coming back to this state until they have basic protections in the workplace. And if you don't think they exist, I will set up a meeting with them and you can sit down and talk to them. Because they do exist, and we talk about it every year, because they ask me, have you guys passed that bill yet? I can't believe that it's taken 4 or 5 years and you still haven't been able to get it passed. Then I have to walk through why. Well, there's a lot of folks that like to create all these kind of, boogeymen out there that, there's going to be massive lawsuits, there's going to be all kinds of litigation, businesses are going to have to close their doors. I suppose all of those different arguments were made when we passed the other protections that are currently in statute on the state and federal level. Some of those same arguments, if you look at the transcripts back in the 1960s, came up when we made it so that you couldn't fire someone based on their race. That, I have a religious argument, or, I have this kind of freedom as a business owner. Well, no, when you avail yourself of the marketplace, when you avail yourself of the marketplace to make money, you have certain obligations to uphold certain rights and human dignities of other people because you're making money, you're making a profit off it. And not only that, when you discriminate against somebody based on a characteristic that they cannot control, you hurt the marketplace for everyone. Put aside human rights, civil rights, and human dignity. The reason why we make it so that you cannot discriminate against somebody in interstate commerce based off of their race, their sex, whatever the case, marital status, that's one you choose. You're not even born with that. But the reason why we protect those statuses is because, number one, it upholds the dignity of everyone. Number two, it ensures that we have a vibrant marketplace for everyone. But the marketplace aside, I think that it's important to talk about some of the fundamental civil rights issues involved with this. First, I think for anybody who is heterosexual in here, imagine getting married on Sunday and then coming to work, putting down your little picture frame of the person that you just got married to and love at work that Monday, excited about your wedding, excited to talk to your coworkers about who you just married, and then your boss calling you in and telling you that you're fired. And then finding out that there's absolutely no recourse for that. They didn't fire you because you got married, they just fired because they don't like your lifestyle. So you don't have any protection. That happens in the state of Nebraska. And if you don't believe it, again, come on over here. I'll set up a meeting. I'll set up a meeting with an attorney who graduated from a very accomplished law school, was offered a position by a law firm in this state, and then it was rescinded the minute that she asked about same-sex partner benefits. Or the person that lives in my district that was fired from a fast food restaurant after it came out that he had a boyfriend. That happens in this state. It happens every single month, and it happens in Nebraska. And if you don't think that our young people know it...
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morfeld. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fellow Senators, friends all, I stand in support of LB627, and I want to start out by saying I'm disappointed that everyone is not in this chamber for this debate. This is an important debate, one that we need to discuss in the open and not hide away from. I think it's important that we address the many emails that we've received. It's time that we get away from theology and we talk about human rights. Many people have reached out to us and said that as Christians, they feel they're being discriminated against with this bill. But broad diversity includes both religion and sexual orientation. We're talking about parity. And when you talk about parity in business, you're talking about the principles of parity being low cost, high yield investment in major businesses' talent, as well as in their broader profile as forward-looking, responsible businesses, which is exactly what Senator Morfeld was just talking about. We want to make sure, especially, that we address this younger generation coming in who is looking for parity in the workplace. We're not asking that Christians subscribe to certain beliefs. We're asking employees and employers to a code of conduct. In my research, I found 2,500 private public employers that have written policies prohibiting workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation. And they're doing that because there's a growing body of law and company policy that says that this protection is needed. Some of the companies that I found were companies where a lot of young people are working, like PayPal in Nebraska, Facebook in Nebraska, Google, soon to be in Nebraska, Groupon, American Eagle, Pandora, IKEA, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And guess what? TD Ameritrade. So I want to point that out again. TD Ameritrade has this policy. So why wouldn't we, as legislators, want to foster an atmosphere where people of different backgrounds can work together? That's what we're talking about today. Move away from the theology and let's talk about the human rights, because that's what this bill is all about. Employers should have only one question. Are you going to do what you need to do to perform your job? What your beliefs are outside your job is not a concern here. And that's what we're talking about today. Let's talk about parity. Let's talk about human rights. Let's talk about how we embrace this younger generation who is looking for employment where people understand that their personal beliefs outside of that office are their personal beliefs. And if we start getting into theology and people come up, as Senator Pansing Brooks said, and say, hey, I have nothing against this community, but it's against my religion, then we're going to start having some conversations about the people in their office that are cheating on their spouses, that might be stealing from their businesses, that might be cruel to others. Because if we want to talk about Christian principles, I guarantee in that office, there are many things, or that business, there are many things we can address here on the mic. So let's not go down that path this time like we did last time. Let's talk about what this bill is about. This bill is about human rights. This bill is about stepping up the plate and doing what's being done all over the country around us already. And let's put on our big boy pants and help Senator Brooks get this bill moved forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Clerk for announcements.
Mr. President, the Government Committee will hold an executive session under the south balcony at 11:30.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to debate, Senator Chambers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And every breath you take, every move you make, I'm watching you. Members of the legislature, these kind of issues are very easy for me to resolve in terms of how I will act on them. Although you can look at my complexion and see that people of my kind were owned as cows, pigs, chickens, sold, bartered, murdered, raped, burned alive. Pregnant women were beaten until the fetus came out, then they stomped it to death. I'm sure these were pro-life people. I'm going to tell you why I say that. That should have filled me with hatred for everything white and everything not black. I do have a lot of hostile feelings toward those who enslaved black people, toward those who today have the same mentality and attitudes. But if a child has a fool for a father, I would not harm the child because the father is a fool. The child is already being punished by having such a father. It is not difficult for me to identify with any individual or any group who is or are mistreated, not because of anything they've done to anybody, but because of what they are or who they are. I get tired of hearing the prayers. You know how I feel about the flag, your flag salute, and you all said it this morning and talked about liberty and justice for all. And you're going to vote for this bill in a way that will deny liberty and justice to your own brothers and sisters. Then you'll get up here piously tomorrow and hypocritically and have somebody pray over you. I don't know if you say that flag salute every day. Doesn't it taste like ashes in your mouth when you get to the part that says, with liberty and justice for all? How about when you take God's name in vain? One nation under God, it's not one nation. And based on what I learned about God when I was a little child and didn't know any better, it certainly is not godly. Indivisible. I read in white people's newspapers how this country is now divided more than it has ever been, and you all make those statements every day knowing they're falsehoods. It's not difficult for you to do things that hurt your brothers and sisters because your conscience is seared and you no longer see them as human beings, because they are put on the outer edges. They are put on the underside of the garment. They are treated as things and not people. I identify with their plight, even though I'm sure there are racist members in the LGBTQ community. But if A is a racist, why should I get at B just because B is closer to me or near and within my reach? When Cain asked that question to you all's God, am I my brother's keeper? I give an answer that the Christians and religious people do not. My answer is yes, I am my brother and my sister's keeper. And if a God there be, we're talking, and he'd say something to me along that line.
1 minute.
It wouldn't be in the form of a question. It would be, Chambers, if I could get those who say they worship me to be as concerned about their brothers and sisters as you are, then we could close churches, we could close mosques, we could close temples, we could close lodge halls, and just let people go about their business, leaving others alone, helping where help is needed, but certainly not putting into the law something that is going to hurt people when it comes to trying to provide a living for themselves and their families. One of the first tenets of Catholic social justice is that a person's entitled to make a living. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. I have to stand up and speak about this very briefly because for the first time in the history of this bill being debated in this body, you have someone in this body who could be affected by this bill. You have a colleague who could be one of those people affected by this bill, but it's only because I have the privilege of being here on this floor today that that can happen to me. And that's something that I'd like you all to think about. I share a common concern with many of you about the threat of brain drain here in Nebraska. It's a very personal interest for me. I employ 12 young women in our state. I'm a business owner myself, and I have a well-invested interest in attracting and keeping young people in our state. And if you ask me why I do the work that I do, that would be the answer, because I want Nebraska to be a place where everybody feels welcome, that they can call this place home, that they can have a future here. Many young professionals and creative people are here because they recognize the potential in our increasing diversity, both in culture and in industry, professionally, socially, and they see Nebraska as the best setting for their own story. The Midwest is full of good people. We're hard workers, we're generous with our time and with our financial resources, we're humble and we're willing to learn. And I think there's a lot to learn about why Nebraska struggles to keep young people here. As a young professional and employer, like I said, and as a newly elected official, I feel like it's important for people like me to work harder for policies that give all people equality of opportunity here in Nebraska, where discrimination against LGBTQ people continues to give us unequal access to the law. I cannot divide my responsibility as a young professional and lawmaker from my responsibility as a citizen, and that is to speak up and do the work and help anybody who just wants the same chance as all of you to build their best life in Nebraska. And colleagues, we have the opportunity to do that today. There's a business case for non-discrimination in employment. That's been made here today. You all know that. You've all been lobbied. You know the reasons. But this is our responsibility, and this is an opportunity that we have. I love living in Nebraska. I live here on purpose. I have many friends who have left this state because they don't feel accepted because of the laws that we have here, and they've been punished for that. Like Senator Morfeld was saying, I too know people who have left the state for those reasons. We have an engaged and diverse young professional culture, but it's silly for us to talk about in this body. It's silly and ridiculous and laughable and shameful for us to talk about equality before the law and brain drain and talent attraction and retention when we don't treat people equally under the law. We just don't. We don't do it here. And it's sad, but a lot of people won't do the right thing until the law requires that they do the right thing. And that's why we 49 lawmakers have that responsibility in Nebraska. So that's all I want to say about that. I think that we have a unique opportunity here. We can make history. This is a real issue that affects people. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also agree that every person should be treated with dignity and respect, and I definitely try to do that in my life. I do have problems with this bill, though. First of all, I believe special class protection is unwarranted in this bill. Historically, protected class status have been reserved for persons affected by three general characteristics. First, oppression and denial of access to education. economic opportunity, and voting rights. Second, the class possessed obvious identifiable characteristics. And third, the class lacked access to political due process and debate. This bill has not identified that these protections are needed or that these problems exist. Then the Nebraska Constitution prohibits restrictions on rights of conscience and religious convictions. The Constitution of the state of Nebraska acknowledges the source of truth in its preamble. We the people, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom, do ordain and establish the following Declaration of Rights and frame a government as the Constitution of the state of Nebraska. Section 4 of our Constitution declares, quote, all persons have a natural and indefeasible right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences. No person shall be compelled to support any place of worship, nor shall any interference with the rights of conscience be permitted. Religion, morality, and knowledge, however, being essential to good government, it shall be the duty of the legislature to pass suitable laws to protect every religious denomination in the peaceable enjoyment of its own mode of public worship. End quote. I believe there's a problem in this bill with violating that clause. When the Nebraska Constitution states that morality is essential to good government, it is referring to moral absolutes and boundaries that do not change over time. The behavior this bill seeks to protect falls outside those boundaries. This bill would directly interfere with the rights of conscience of businesses and Nebraska employers in direct violation of this constitutional protection. Nebraska voters would have to amend this Nebraska constitutional provision in order for this bill to be constitutionally valid. I believe LB 627 violates the U.S. Constitution by prohibiting the free exercise of religion as well. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution declares, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. LB 627 improperly intends to restrict the free exercise of employers' religious beliefs and speech. LB 627 properly protects the religious expression of employees, but it fails to protect the sincerely held religious beliefs of employers. Nebraska Statute Section 48-1101 says, quote, it is the policy of this state to foster the employment of all employable persons and to safeguard their right to obtain and hold employment without discrimination because of their religion. This protection of employees' religious expression in the Fair Employment Practice Act was adopted because of the U.S. constitutional limitations of state government to interfere with a citizen's exercise of religious convictions. LB 627 fails to preserve the free exercise of religion of individuals who manage churches and religious institutions, which would be covered and subject to the Act. Also, LB 627 fails to protect the free exercise of religious beliefs of private employers, such as this happened in other states. One other thing I have a problem with is the definition of gender identity.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Halloran, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues, fellow Nebraskans. We went through quite a colorful conversation, Senator Morfeld and I did, I think the last time this bill came to the floor. If I could first make a comment, I think Senator Chambers gave me a lesson in perception and what's perceived to be something that may not be something in a recent bill I had in front of Judiciary. And it's a lesson that I've well noted. I think perceptions are important, but perception is in the eye of the beholder sometimes. And I think laws, and I think Senator James may or may not agree with this, although this was pretty much his point with the bill I brought before Judiciary is that the language in the law has to be very clear and very specific in that we don't have room for ambiguity, we don't have room for perception, we don't have room for something being perceived, something that's not. And so I think the language needs to be cleaned up, needs to be a little bit better defined on sexual orientation. But that being said, if Senator Morfeld would re-engage with me on a conversation, I would appreciate that.
Senator Morfeld, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Morfeld, as I recall, the last time we had this discussion on the floor, I brought up a hypothetical of my applying to your nonprofit for a job. And there were several applicants, and for probably good reasons, you may have chose not to hire me. But in the course of that, I did not declare to you that I might be gay, and I may, after being turned down for possibly very good reasons not to be hired at your nonprofit, I came back and said, look, he didn't hire me because I was gay. So how would you deal with that case in court, Senator? If you didn't perceive me to be gay, and then I came back and said, he didn't hire me because I was gay, how would you or the court deal with that issue?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. And first, we have several positions open at my nonprofit, and I'd love to have you apply.
That's exactly the script of the last time. That's very good.
Second, just how you would deal with that instance, just like you deal with any other instance of alleged discrimination. So what would happen is you'd likely file a complaint first with the EEOC, I believe, or the state EEOC. But the bottom line is that there has to be some kind of evidence of discrimination. If you can't produce that, like any discrimination claim, it's going to be thrown out fairly quickly on its merits, whether you're filing a sex discrimination claim, race discrimination claim, or even marital status is covered currently under the statute. You have to have evidence.
So I couldn't file a suit against you and it wouldn't be held up in court if I argued that your perception of me was that I was gay and that you didn't hire me?
You could file a suit, but like any suit, you have to have some kind of evidence. And if you don't have any evidence of that, then you can't prove your case, and it's going to be thrown out.
That's precisely my point, colleagues, is there may not be evidence, but we're talking about perception in this bill. The other protected classes are very clear and aren't left to any ambiguity. It's really easy to distinguish if someone is of one race or another, one color or another, if that person's handicapped, or if it's an age issue, whether that person's old or not, or whether that person has disabilities. Those are all protected classes, but they're very apparent, very obvious.
1 minute.
And I think that's the issue we're talking about here is whether my case would be successful in court or not is not the total issue. The point is that there would be legal costs, there would be legal ramifications for me to hire an attorney to take care of that lawsuit. And I believe that's what this is going to open up for many, many employers when the perception may not be there on the part of the employer, but ultimately a suit is filed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Senator Geist, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And I would ask if should anyone be treated as a second-class citizen? And of course, we'd say no. I don't think there is a person on this floor or in this state that thinks people should be treated as a second-class citizen, and certainly none of us on this floor advocating for that position. It is the job of us as lawmakers to affirm and uphold constitutionally protected freedoms and not pass laws that intentionally or unintentionally limit those who may exercise constitutional freedoms and fundamental rights. I support laws that don't pick and choose who gets freedom and who doesn't. It's a fundamental American value which I believe is paramount to protect. And thankfully, in Nebraska, businesses are free to decide the values they would like to adopt and the missions they seek to advance. Protecting freedom in the marketplace affirms respect for diverse views, builds community, and guarantees an array of choices for everyone. The government and the legislature should not be dictating to business owners whom they should hire, but should allow business owners to hire the best candidate for the job and for the mission of their particular business. Businesses have the right to be free to run their businesses, their private businesses, according to their beliefs, and thus contribute to the diversity which is essential to any thriving marketplace. I oppose 627 because it would undermine the diversity and the tolerance of this great state and would curtail a robust and flourishing marketplace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Geist. Senator Murman, you're recognized.
Good morning, colleagues in Nebraska. Today I stand in strong opposition to LB627. Today I think about the unintended consequences and risks that business owners across the state will face. LB627 would threaten small business owners with liability for alleged discrimination based on perceived gender. As a body, we talk a lot about growing our state and making sure that people feel welcome here. I've heard the argument that if we don't pass this bill, we will be turning away people who want to work and start their lives here, because without this legislation, Nebraska is a horrible place to live. I would beg to differ. According to Forbes magazine, Nebraska ranks among the top 5 states, best states for business. 6 of the 10 states in Forbes' best business state for business currently do not have non-discrimination laws that include sexual orientation and gender identity. As lawmakers, we need to uphold constitutional freedom and fundamental rights. This bill's language is cherry-picking who gets freedom and who doesn't. In this body, we need to protect all our freedoms. Sadly, across our nation, we have seen the victims of such laws. Often they are people of faith who simply want to live, work, and raise their family consistent with their deeply held religious beliefs. Businesses across the state could be at risk for lawsuits if they support causes, candidates, or nonprofits that differ from their beliefs. Nebraska business owners have the opportunity to hire who they think would be the best at the job because our legislature isn't telling us who we can and cannot hire. Small business is the engine that drives Nebraska's economy. I was a business owner myself over the last 20 years running a dairy farm operation. As a business owner, we sought employees who could help us achieve our business goals. Nebraskans value the freedom to peaceably live our lives according to our beliefs and oppose government punishment of fellow citizens who have different views. We need to continue to empower small businesses to succeed and not burden them with additional mandates. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Murman. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Colleagues, I've been thinking about these words a lot lately. I had a similar discussion a week or two ago, and Senator Chambers said that these words are aspirational. I think he's right. I think they are aspirational. I think we haven't gotten there yet. And he says, because I'm a young whippersnapper, which I am, that I'm still full of hope, that perhaps we can never get there. And I think he's right there too. Perhaps we can't. But that doesn't mean that I won't fight every day to try to get us there. I'm also reminded of Lincoln's words at Gettysburg when he talked about a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He wondered whether such a nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We can say to Lincoln today, we have endured, we are enduring. But we have also learned that the price of democracy is that we are always in a great battlefield of ideas. We do not all agree today, colleagues, not even about what we disagree about. In my fields of philosophy and theology, there are not always readily apparent answers, and so sometimes the best scholarship simply asks better questions, simply says more what we disagree about. So today I say to you, I do not think we are arguing about whether or not an entire group of people in the state of Nebraska deserves full, free, and equal lives. That's not the debate we're having. The founders tell us that those truths are self-evident. And frankly, they're not even relevant. The question we have today is a particularly narrow question. The question is whether or not it is in the best interest of this state for LGBTQ folks to be a protected class for employment purposes. You've heard that the Chambers of Commerce of Omaha and Lincoln support this bill. They say that this will help us to bring companies to Nebraska. We spend a lot of taxpayer dollars every year on just that issue, and this one is free. Some of you know that I have an economics degree from undergrad and that I'm from a small business family. It was a long time ago since undergrad, but I think it's still true today that the most efficient economy is better than an inefficient economy. Discrimination is inefficient. We want the best person for the job to do a job.
1 minute.
And whenever we consider some aspect of a person that is not their ability to do the job, then we increase the inefficiency in our state. It doesn't make good business sense to have this kind of discrimination, this kind of inefficiency in our system. We've heard that there are safeguards in place. We know that there are for making sure that religious expression is still allowed. We need to make this decision based on the taxpayer money, as we are trying to attract businesses to Nebraska. And we know that this bill will do that because we've heard that from the biggest chambers of commerce in this state, from Omaha and Lincoln. And we need to make sure that we are looking at how we make the best economy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Speaker Scheer would like to recognize 45 fourth graders from Westside Elementary in Norfolk. They are seated in the north balcony. Would you please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, enrollment review reports LB52, 152, 186, 186A, 214, 223, 442, and 536 is correctly engrossed. Urban Affairs Committee, chaired by Senator Rain, reports 476 to general file, 68, 96, 107, 424, 40, 45, and 574 are reported to general file with amendments attached. Senator Bowles would like to put an amendment to LB 832. Name adds Senator Pansy Brooks to 15, Wishart 15, Kavanaugh 15, Blood 164, Kavanaugh to 627. Mr. President, Senator Brandt would move to adjourn the body until Tuesday morning, March 5 at 9 o'clock a.m.
The question is, shall the legislature adjourn? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.